Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me much pleasure to be here this morning. Of course, I'd like to also acknowledge the various trainers and the judges and our guest from Singapore who's here with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, productivity, of course, is critical. I mean, it'd be sort of quite a redundant statement to say that we all want productivity. Of course, we all want productivity. The question, of course, is how do we attain that productivity? And what measures do we take? Your quality, your circles, of course, requires you to be able to engage people who perhaps may not be engaged, who are perhaps at the processes that may not have had their voices heard, as highlighted by the Pro-Vice Chancellor. As you know, as far as NTPC levy is concerned, every employer in Fiji contributes 1% of the gross base salary towards NTPC. Approximately $21 to $23 million is annually collected from this levy. And as you also know that various companies have the opportunity to be able to use those or claim from that funds if they're able to provide training for the staff, if they use the courses available at NTPC. But there was a problem, and the problem was that we saw that it was mainly the larger companies or Method A companies that were actually sourcing it, as opposed to the Method B companies. And there was also a lot of, through our consultations with the various stakeholders, in particular the small businesses, small to medium businesses, they said that they felt that their money was being wasted and that essentially some of the courses being offered by NTPC was not necessarily relevant for their purposes. So government has, with discussion through FNU, made a number of decisions in respect of the levy. And I think it's very important for you to be able to understand what's happening. From next January, what's actually going to happen is that 50% of the $21 to $23 million that will be collected will go towards a trust fund which will be used by government to pay for medical services of all of you who will actually go and visit a GP, a general practitioner. This is again to ensure that people who we expect productivity from actually have a right, healthy environment. The health is being looked after. I'll give you a classic example. Most people who currently cannot afford to visit a general practitioner or private doctor will go, if they wake up in the morning, may not be feeling that well, but they want to go to work. So they will go to a health center, or they will go to, say, in Suva's case, CWM hospital. When they go there are many other people like them. What they present or the symptom that they have is not critical. They're not having a heart attack. Their hand has not been chopped off. They have not had a major gash where there's blood spurting out. But it is what we call a general problem that can be dealt with by a doctor. But however, when they go to CWM or the health center, they end up waiting probably for about 2-3 hours because nearly everybody else is coming there to do that because they've got a head cold. So then they turn up to work probably after 3-4 hours after they should have started. So what's the input for the day? They're very keen to work. They're very keen to ensure that they're able to meet their targets for the day. They're also part of the team they want to contribute to. However, because they've got a head cold, they may need some antibiotics or maybe even a Panadol, etc., but they need somebody to tell them what's wrong with them. If from January next year, you are able to visit the local GP in your area without you having to pay for it, you may finish with the GP within 15 minutes. And obviously that needs to be paid for. So 50% of the levy that's being collected will actually go towards paying for private visits to general practitioners. Many countries have done this. Many countries are very successfully doing so. The other 40% of the levy that will be collected will now go towards workers' compensation. A few months ago, I had to deal with a particular matter where, as you know, government is now outsourcing a lot of work. There's a lot of private sector involvement in many of the public infrastructure works. So this is somebody who had a company and was a subcontractor of a subcontractor. And his job, this company's job, was to cart gravel up somewhere in Nanronga, Navosa area, up in the hills. So So the driver who was driving for him had an accident, the truck tumbled, and he got crushed to death, and he died whilst working. It so happened that the employer did not have workers' compensation. So he had his family had absolutely no opportunity to get any form of compensation. Now, assuming if the driver had lived, but perhaps had his legs crushed and lost his legs, there would have been no compensation for him. He would have had to pursue his employer through the court system. He probably could not have afforded the lawyers, would have taken probably years for him to do so, and he had his whole life would have changed. From January of next year, there no longer will be a requirement for employers to take out workers' compensation insurance, because 40% of the funds of the $21 or $23 million will go towards this fund to pay for workers' compensation. It will be dealt by the Accident Compensation Commission of Fiji, which is already dealing with third-party insurance. The third aspect of the $23 million, which is 10%, will go towards NTPC. That fund will go towards that. NTPC currently has a trust fund of approximately $30 million, and government has already decided and spoken to the VC that we will, including the chair of your council, to be able to ensure that the NTPC has courses that are relevant, that are more attuned to the needs and the demands of smaller businesses and medium businesses. Government has also, apart from that, has now allocated a new tax incentives that any employer that sends any of its staff for training can claim 150% tax deduction. You know, you may have heard that we also announced in the budget that now women will be able to gain another 2 weeks for maternity leave. Instead of 84 working days for maternity leave, they'll get 98 working days. You also now have paternity leave. So partners or husbands of women who are about to have children or have had children or is having children, they can take 5 days off work and be paid work. We've also included 5 days of what we call family care leave. So this is leave that you take should somebody in your family get ill. For example, you know, God forbid that you go home and then you find that your son or daughter across the road had an accident, is in very, in ICU, and need to stay there with them for the next 2-3 days. Most people, when they're in that situation, they take time off their annual leave, or they go leave without pay. Now you don't have to do that because you actually have a specific leave for you to take, and it's actually paid leave. Now the interesting thing was, when we announced this, a number of employers came to me and said, why are you giving these people so much leave? They're already not productive, and now you're giving them more leave. They'll become even more unproductive. A lot of employers have said this. In fact, an employer organization, one of the reps recently was in the good old Fiji Times, making comments saying that they weren't consulted. Ladies and gentlemen, the philosophy that we are coming from is that if you are able to ensure your employers that you understand and you know what the needs and demands are, and you're able to cater for that, when they then actually come to work, they'll be a lot more productive. If they know that, look, my employer is looking after me through this legal framework where women are now given another 2 more weeks for maternity leave. We now have fathers of babies who can actually take time off to be with their partner, with their spouse, with their wife, and with their baby at the same time. They will feel that, look, this is something very positive. If they know that if somebody gets ill in the family, like a parent or a spouse or a child, and they need to take time off work, and they can, it'll be paid leave up to 5 days, they will feel that I'm being looked after. That's the philosophy we are working on. And we hope it's going to work. The trick, of course, is making sure that those people now, when they do come to work, they perform 100%. That's one aspect of productivity that I want to discuss. The other aspect of productivity I'd like to discuss, as was highlighted earlier on, is the issue of processes, business processes. And I can take government as an example because we're carrying out civil service reform. Civil service reforms is not only about increasing salaries. It's not only about having an open merit recruitment system. It's also about improving business processes. We have engaged with the Singaporeans. Government has engaged with the Singaporeans through the Economic Cooperation Organization, where we are looking at various business processes to improve government services. There's one particular project we'll be launching very soon, and it'll start off in Suva, is the ability for people to register their babies on their phones and pick up a birth certificate. At the moment, for example, when a lady gives birth, when the baby is born, they get a card that says, you know, your birth identification card. You then take that card and you physically have to go down to the BDM, or Birth, Deaths and Marriages office, and then you register your baby and you get a birth certificate. We found a few years ago, about 6-7 years ago, there was something like 24,000 Fijians who did not have a birth certificate, and some of them were as old as 55 years old, 45 years old, 35 years old. Many parents in Fiji do not get a birth certificate of their child until the child has to go to school. So this is why whenever the school is about to start 2-3 weeks before, the office of the BDM has to stay open all Saturday, has to open in the evenings, because all these parents are rushing to get a birth certificate so they can go and give it at the school to get the child enrolled. So we have to pay overtime. We have to have staff to stay back. Now, if you are able to get a process or make it easier for people to register or get a birth certificate when the child is born, hopefully more people will do so. More people register their babies then. So it saves us down the track every year having to open up offices late. So what will actually happen now is that when the mother is given the birth notice, it will have a unique identification number. She can then pick up her mobile phone. Of course, you don't name your babies immediately. You may take 1 or 2 days. You pick up your phone, you go to the app, you fill out the form on the app, you have your unique identification number. If you're Itauke, you can put all your Matangali details, your landowning details, register in the Yavusa, etc. And then you submit it to BDM. BDM will then ask you, what time would you like to come and pick up your birth certificate? When we came up with this idea, we had people falling on the floor at BDM offices saying, how we've never had people making appointments at the BDM office. Nobody ever thought that you could actually make an appointment to come and pick up a birth certificate. So now people will have a time allocated to them to say, I'll come at 10:15 a.m. on the 7th of October to pick up my birth certificate, my son's birth certificate. You'll have a dedicated line. In 6 months' time, you'll be able to pay online. In 9 months' time, you'll be able to get an e-birth certificate. So you simply have it on your phone with a barcode, you go to the school, you tap it against the machine, and they've got the details. So there's a number of changes that will be taking place very expeditiously in the next 6 to 9 months as far as government services are concerned. It means that people need to re-engineer their thoughts. They need to re-engineer how they look at their customers and their clients. And indeed, many people in government do not see ordinary citizens as their clients. They see them most times as nuisance. They see them as people that, you perhaps don't take their phone calls. So by having or adopting technology, we'll be able to provide a new level of service. We'll be able to provide an equality in the service delivery. So it's very critically important, ladies and gentlemen, for you, when you are talking about increasing productivity, to be able to look at how you can adopt technology and how you can adopt technology for your own benefit, not just for your own benefit in terms of your work, but overall your customer base. I think in Fiji, a lot of people, perhaps it's more common in the private sector, but most certainly in statutory bodies and various other organizations related to government, the idea that the person standing behind the counter is your client, is your customer, is the person you need to provide the service to, is most certainly in most cases not there. And we need to change that culture. And that cultural change is very important if we're able to see what is the outcome of the organization. And I'm particularly keen about statutory bodies and government organizations. We need to see what is your mandate, why are you there, what is the purpose of your department, the purpose of your organization. Of course, some of that can be, your clients could be your internal clients, and that's always very different too. But if everybody's able to get on the same page in respect of productivity, in respect of maintaining quality, then it will not only be beneficial to you overall in respect of, better job satisfaction, increase in perhaps your work, improvement in your terms and conditions of work, but overall the country will benefit. And I think sometimes people actually forget that if everybody's on the same page in the private sector and the public sector, the overall productivity of the country improves, which means the country does overall very well. Classic point is Singapore. A classic point. Everybody wants to be like Singapore in Fiji. Everybody praises Singapore. But do you know what sacrifices they went through? Do you know what it took them to get there? Do you know what it took them, what kind of mind shifts they had to make to become the Singapore of today? I can show you photographs of Singapore in the 1960s, even the 1970s, completely different. This is why, for example, we are using Dr. Liu, I think, from Singapore, who is the man with Lee Kuan Yew who essentially developed the modern city of Singapore. And we are now using his services to do an overall assessment of all our towns and cities. Because frankly, right since independence, even prior to that, we have never had a mind shift in respect of how to develop our towns and cities. It's been, in a way, from one perspective, rather haphazard. There's been no overall blueprint. So somebody sticks a hotel there, somebody sticks an industrial park down the road. There's been absolutely no overall plan regarding towns and cities. We still have this mentality, every town must have one big bus stand and the market is right next to it. Then everybody comes on every Saturday, you go to the market, do your shopping and you go back. Even though you may live in Rewanga, you may live in Samambula or Tamavua, you all go to Suva. It doesn't work that way. It should not work that way. And you can see it. Everybody's setting up all these illegal stalls along the way. Those of you who know Superfresh, have you seen what it looks like now in front of Superfresh? You see all these stalls along in Flagstaff and various other places. It goes to show there's a demand for it. So how are we reacting to that demand? We should be looking ahead. Today, 50% of our entire population is below the age of 27. 50%. And those of you who are not 27, you know what it means. 70% of the population in Fiji today is below the age of 40. So people like me and those of you over the age of 40, you're in the minority. 70% is below the age of 40. 50% is below the age of 27. What does it mean? When you have a younger population, it means there'll be more babies produced. Very simple. So what are we going to do about it? What's our plans for education? What are our plans for primary schools, secondary schools? Of course, many politicians are talking only about university students because they vote. They're not talking about primary schools and secondary schools. Populations are moving. A lot of people have migrated from Vanua Levu to Viti Levu. We like to keep them there. We want to send more people from Viti Levu to Vanua Levu. What are we going to do about it? If there are more, for example, farming areas being converted to residential lots, are there enough schools in those areas? We talked about productivity vis-a-vis, your environment. If people have to travel less distances to get to a particular service, it means the carbon footprint will be less. So if I live in Tamavua and have to travel every second day to go to the market in Suva, I'll burn more fuel. But if my small mini market is in Tamavua, I'll walk to the market. The same philosophy is behind, this banning of plastic bags that will take place in 2020. People forget, when I was a kid, when we used to go to the market, there was no plastic bags. There's a thing called a jolly, those made bags that people have, reusable bags. We've all forgotten about it. So there are many things, perhaps sometimes, that we may have done certain things previously it has worked, but we may have adopted new ways now, it is not working. It's the way that we teach English to our children. Different ways of teaching English. Some have dropped the phonetics, some have adopted, what we call rote learning. So there are different ways of looking at things. We are, for example, through education system now, going to have 2 strands of maths. Why should a person who's not going to have pure maths have to study algorithms and algebra and all of that? They don't need to, but they need to study life maths. They need to know the basic things about transactions, percentages. When they go to a store, they must know when they say 10% discount, what does it mean? Maths is compulsory. But if you're going to get everybody to study pure maths, and that's not their passion may be, for example, geography, or their passion may be something else, woodwork. Why should we get them to study maths? But they must know the fundamental maths. That's how you keep people engaged in the schooling system. If you have subjects, availability of subjects, they'll actually help them to be engaged. In the same way, if you have clients, what are you doing to make sure that your clients are engaged with your organization and want to come and talk to you? I see Fiji Revenue and Customs Services. They say the taxmen or taxwomen are the most hated in the world. But now the culture is changing. People, these organizations need to reinvent themselves. There are many countries, for example, people love going to the tax office because they're so friendly and help them solve their problems. One last point I'd like to make before I finish, ladies and gentlemen, and this is, I think, quite common in Fiji. If you have a position of authority, you must not abuse it. If you have a position where you're actually making decisions, do not start off with a negative view, I will say no to this person. A lot of people start off from that position. Whether they be working in the municipal council, whether they're working in a government department, whether they're working in a statutory body, the whole point is, these are the rules. Do you fit in? Yes, no. There are many people, many organizations that still don't have a checklist. People always complain to us and say, we went to see this person on this organization over the counter and they told us to get these 10 documents. The next time when I went, the other person said, no, no, no. You need these 12 documents, but not these, half of this 6 is not required. So the third time when I went back with those 12, they said, no, no, no. You need these 15 documents, but another 8 is required. It's a very simple issue. Where's the checklist? If there's checklist and everybody adheres to the checklist, including people on either side of the counter, your process will be very quick. People know what the rules are. It creates transparency. It removes the room for corruption. It removes the room for nepotism. So it is in everybody's best interest. And I think ultimately what we should all be focused on is the outcome of your organization and what do you want to achieve and your stated mandate. People are very good in having stated core values and principles. I see many organizations doing that, but how many people are actually adhering to it? But we must keep it simple. Simplicity actually has perfection in it. If you try and complicate things, you'll actually won't even know what you're doing yourself. So I'd like to thank, ladies and gentlemen, the organizers of this conference. I'd like to thank FNU and NTPC. And also, please urge you to look at some of the bigger issues in respect of the outcomes of your organization. You'll be very surprised. You may think you're very small, but in fact, if you get it right, you'll be able to contribute to the overall growth and productivity of the country that you live in and the country of your birth. Vinaka, thank you.